I'm Isolde Vaughn, and at 29, I was erased from existence by the two people who should have loved me most. My parents didn't just betray me, they declared me dead to steal $50 million, dollars, a fortune my grandfather meant for me alone. 3 seconds into that Chicago law office, I knew I'd never forget the smell of polished oak and treachery. My father, Victor, sat like a king in his tailored navy suit, his silver cufflinks glinting under the chandelier's glow. My mother, Evelyn, perched beside him, her diamond earrings catching the light as she adjusted her silk scarf, a gesture practiced to perfection. My sister, Madeline, barely 25, lounged with the confidence of someone who'd never known failure, her manicured nails tapping her phone. The lawyer, Mr. Kessler, stood at the head of the table, his face carved from years of secrets. He read my grandfather's will, and the room froze. $50 million, dollars, all to me. My father's hand tightened around his pen. My mother gasped, a sound too sharp to be genuine. Madeline's smirk faltered just for a moment. Then came the fire. Victor reached for the cashier's check, his movements slow, deliberate, like a predator savoring the kill. He flicked his lighter, and the flame danced, hungry and orange. The check curled, blackened, and dissolved into ash, drifting to the table like a mockery of snow. Evelyn's hand flew to her chest, her eyes wide with feigned horror. Madeline laughed, a single, cruel note. They waited for me to crumble, to scream, to beg. But I didn't. I sat still, my hand steady, my heart pounding with a truth they couldn't touch. My grandfather, Walter, had seen this coming. He hadn't just left me money, he'd left me a map, a strategy, a way to turn their greed against them. I walked out of that office with nothing but a folded note in my pocket, its edges worn from his trembling hands. They thought they'd won. They didn't know the war had just begun. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you stunned. Hit that subscribe button to catch the latest chapters of this story on our YouTube channel. The air in that Chicago law office thickened with unspoken rage, a weight that pressed against my skin like humidity before a storm. The mahogany table stretched between us, a battlefield littered with coffee cups and legal folders, its surface gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Victor's face, usually a mask of control, twitched at the corners, his jaw a vice as Mr. Kessler's voice cut through the silence. $50 million, he repeated, as if the number itself were a crime. My inheritance, my grandfather's final act of faith, hung in the room like a guillotine. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her scarf, her knuckles pale, her lips parting in a rehearsed display of shock. Madeline, slouched in her chair, stopped scrolling her phone, her eyes narrowing as if I'd stolen something that was rightfully hers. I sat opposite them, my hands folded in my lap, the folded note from Walter tucked inside my sleeve, its inked words a quiet pulse against my wrist. Victor moved first. His hand, steady as a surgeon's, reached for the check Kessler had placed before me. He held it up, the paper catching the light, its zeros a silent scream. His eyes met mine, and I saw it. Not just anger, but a hatred so deep it seemed to carve new lines into his face. He flicked his lighter, and the flame roared to life, consuming the check in seconds. Ash fell like confetti, settling on the table, on my hands. Evelyn's gasp morphed into a triumphant sob, her performance flawless. Madeline's lips curled, a predator's smile. They expected me to break, to let the weight of their betrayal crush me into submission. But I didn't.
My pulse steadied, my gaze locked on the drifting ash. Walter's note burned against my skin, its message clear. This was only the opening move. They thought they'd erased me, but they'd only lit the fuse. I stood, my chair scraping the floor, and slipped the note deeper into my sleeve. The game was theirs no longer. Kessler watched me, his eyes sharp behind his glasses, a silent ally in a room of enemies. I turned toward the door, my steps deliberate, my heart a drumbeat of resolution. The note was a promise, a key to a vault Walter had hidden, a weapon I didn't yet understand. Outside, the Chicago wind whipped through the loop, carrying the scent of exhaust and possibility. I didn't look back. The city's pulse matched my own, a rhythm of survival, of defiance. My parents had burned paper, but they couldn't burn the truth. Walter had known their greed, their cruelty, and he'd armed me for this fight. The note wasn't just words, it was a map, a cipher, a call to war. I clutched it tighter, my fingers tracing its edges as the skyscrapers loomed above me. They'd tried to bury me in their lies, but I was already rising. The vault, whatever it held, was out there, waiting, and with it, the power to turn their victory to ash. The weight of my family's disregard had settled into my bones long before that Chicago law office, a quiet ache that shaped my days like a shadow. At 15, I'd poured my heart into an urban design model, a vision of green rooftops and solar panels woven into Chicago's gritty skyline. I spent months sketching, gluing, dreaming, my fingers stained with ink and hope. One winter evening, I carried it into our Lakeview penthouse, the city's lights glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Victor was on a call, his voice sharp with deal-making. Evelyn sipped her wine, her eyes distant. Madeline, barely 12, sprawled on the couch, texting. I set the model on the coffee table, its tiny panels gleaming. My voice trembled with pride, but Victor's glance was fleeting, a nod before he turned back to his phone. Evelyn's smile was thin, a blade wrapped in silk. She suggested I move it to the garage where it wouldn't clutter the aesthetic.
By morning, I found it there, its solar panels cracked, half buried under a pile of old magazines. Madeline got a new phone that week. I got silence. Years later, at Northwestern, I crafted a business plan for a platform linking Midwest artisans to global markets. Hand-woven textiles, small-batch ceramics, stories of makers who deserved a stage. I printed it on crisp paper, my projections meticulous, my heart laid bare. At a rare family dinner, I slid it across the table to Victor. His eyes scanned it, then flicked to Madeline, who was pitching her internship at his firm. He pushed my plan aside, his voice dismissive. Idealistic, he called it, a word that stung like a slap. Months later, Madeline unveiled a startup, its framework a mirror of my own, her name in the press as its visionary. Evelyn's praise was lavish. I was invisible. That was when I left. Milwaukee became my refuge, a city of brick and resilience, its lakefront raw and unpretentious. I rented a studio with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that hissed like a living thing. I worked at a community center teaching kids to build models of their own dreams. I stopped calling home, stopped answering Evelyn's texts, stopped pretending I belonged. The loneliness was sharp, but it was honest. For the first time, I could hear my own thoughts, unclouded by their expectations. Milwaukee's winters were brutal, but they taught me endurance. I walked the frozen lakefront, my breath clouding in the air, and felt the pieces of myself knitting together. My family hadn't just rejected me, they'd tried to erase me long before the law office. But in that small apartment, with its creaking floors and secondhand books, I found something they couldn't touch, A spark, a stubborn will to build, to matter. Walter had seen it, even when I couldn't. His note, now a talisman in my pocket, was proof. The vault it pointed to wasn't just a place. It was a reckoning, a chance to reclaim what they'd stolen. I wasn't ready yet, but I was moving toward it, step by frozen step. The hospice room in Evanston smelled of antiseptic and fading time. A sterile quiet broken only by the soft beep of machines. Walter lay beneath a thin blanket, his once robust frame reduced to angles and shadows, his hands folded like brittle leaves. His eyes, though, burned with the same clarity that had guided me through childhood summers, when he'd point out constellations above his Michigan cabin or sketch blueprints for imaginary cities on napkins. I hadn't seen him in months, not since I'd fled to Milwaukee, cutting ties to escape the family's suffocating orbit. Guilt had kept me away, but something, a pull I couldn't name, drew me back. I sat beside him, the chair creaking under my weight, and took his hand. His skin was cool, translucent, but his grip tightened, a spark of the man who'd built an empire from nothing. He turned his head, his gaze locking onto mine, and smiled, a faint curve that carried years of unspoken love.
His voice, raspy but firm, broke the silence. He spoke of a key, a small brass thing hidden in his bedside drawer, its surface worn from years of care. I retrieved it, its weight heavier than its size suggested, and held it up, my breath catching. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine, and whispered a name. Kessler. Trust only Kessler, he said, his words sharp with urgency. A storm was coming, he warned, one he'd seen brewing in the family's greed, a betrayal he'd failed to stop. His breath grew shallow, but he pressed on, his voice a thread of steel. I was the one, he said, not Madeline, not Victor's polished air, but me, the one who saw people, who cared for the world beyond profit. My throat burned, my vision blurring. He'd always shown his faith in quiet ways, a nod at my sketches, a question about my dreams, but never like this, never so raw. 2 days later, he slipped away in the night, his absence a weight I carried like stone. The memorial was a spectacle, held at a Chicago country club, its chandeliers casting light on catered hors d'oeuvres and hollow speeches. Madeline spoke of legacy, her voice polished, her eyes dry. Evelyn wore black, her posture regal, her grief a performance. Victor shook hands, his face a mask of solemnity. I stood at the edges, silent, the key heavy in my pocket. Walter's legacy wasn't in their words or their wealth. It was in that key, in the vault it would open, in the fight he'd entrusted to me. I left the memorial early, the Chicago skyline rising against a gray sky. The key was a promise, a weapon, a bridge to something bigger than their betrayal. Walter had known what they'd do, and he'd armed me to face it. The storm was here, and I was ready to meet it. The bank in downtown Chicago loomed like a fortress, its marble columns cold and unyielding, the air inside thick with the scent of wax and wealth. I followed Mr. Kessler through the lobby, my steps echoing on the polished floor, the brass key from Walter tucked in my coat pocket, a silent anchor against the chaos I sensed coming. We were ushered into a glass-walled office where the branch manager, a man named Hargrove, greeted us with a handshake that felt like a formality. His suit was crisp, his smile practiced, but his eyes slid past me as if I were an afterthought. Kessler, his face unreadable, requested a full statement of my accounts. Hargrove's fingers hesitated over his keyboard, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He turned his monitor towards us, and the world tilted. My name, Isolde Vaughn, stared back, my photo clear, my birthday correct. Beside it, in stark red letters, a single word, deceased. My breath stopped, my chest tightening as if the room had lost its air. The word burned into my vision, a legal guillotine that severed me from existence. Hargrove's voice was clipped, professional, as he explained.
6 months prior, my parents had filed a petition in Cook County Court claiming I'd vanished after a mental breakdown, my absence proof of my demise. No body, no proof, just their word twisted into a death certificate that erased me. Kessler's pen scratched against his notepad, his voice sharp as he demanded the grounds for the declaration. Hargrove adjusted his tie, his tone cooling. The court had acted on evidence of my prolonged silence, my failure to contact family, my supposed instability. The truth hit like a wave. They hadn't forged documents or broken laws. They'd weaponized my escape, my choice to flee their control, turning my silence into a noose. Kessler's eyes met mine, steady, urging me to hold fast. He challenged Hargrove, demanding the accounts be unfrozen. The manager's response was a wall. Without a court order, I was a ghost, my assets locked in a legal limbo. Outside, the Chicago River glittered under a steel sky, but I felt unmoored, a shadow in a city that pulsed with life. Kessler walked beside me, his silence heavy with strategy. Back at his office, he spread files across a desk, his voice low. They'd hired private investigators, he said, tracking my movements in Milwaukee, building a case to keep me erased. The fight would be long, months, maybe years of lawyers and hearings, a war against a family that fought with money and lies. For a moment, despair clawed at me, the weight of my non-existence crushing. But Walter's key pressed against my ribs, a reminder of his faith. I straightened, my resolve hardening. They'd tried to bury me, but I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. The vault, whatever it held, was my next step, and I would find it. The safe house in Rogers Park smelled of stale coffee and dust, its windows shrouded in heavy curtains that blocked the Chicago moonlight. I sat at a folding table, my laptop's glow casting shadows on the peeling wallpaper as Kessler sifted through a stack of Walter's old letters. Our mission was Elena, Walter's assistant of 27 years, a woman who'd been more family than employee, her quiet presence a constant in his Evanston home. She'd seen the family's pressure, the late-night arguments, and the coercion that had shadowed Walter's final months. If anyone could swear to their manipulation, it was her. But Elena had vanished after the memorial, resigning without notice, her phone disconnected, her apartment empty. Kessler called it fear, a retreat from a family that crushed what it couldn't control. We traced her through Walter's records, Christmas cards, payroll stubs, a faded photo of her daughter's graduation. After nights of dead ends, we found a lead. Elena was living with her daughter in a small town near Syracuse, New York, a place of snow and silence. The plan was precise. We'd drive east, stay off digital trails, and secure her affidavit, a single voice that could stall the family's grip on Walter's estate. But the isolation of the safe house gnawed at me, its walls closing in with each passing hour. I couldn't call friends, couldn't step outside, couldn't shake the sense of eyes watching from the dark. In that suffocating quiet, I made a mistake that would haunt me. I called Rachel, my mentor from Northwestern, a woman who guided me through late-night study sessions and heartbreak. Her voice was warm, familiar, a lifeline to a life I'd lost. I didn't tell her everything, just enough, a hint about Elena, a plea for help finding her. 2 days later, as we packed for Syracuse, Kessler's phone buzzed, his face drained of color, his voice low. Madeline had gotten to Elena first. She'd shown up at Elena's door, her smile cold, her words sharper. She threatened Elena's daughter's teaching job, her green card, her future. Elena, terrified, had fled again, leaving no trace, her silence now permanent. The room spun, my knees buckling as I sank to the floor. There was only one way Madeline could have known. Rachel, the woman I'd trusted, had sold me out. Kessler later found the proof, a wire transfer from Madeline's account, a payment for Rachel's betrayal. I lay on the safe house floor, the weight of my error crushing me. I'd handed the family their victory, destroyed our only witness, and left us with nothing but shadows. For the first time, I wondered if I could keep fighting, if Walter's faith in me had been misplaced. The morning after Elena's disappearance, the safe house felt like a tomb, its air heavy with the residue of my failure. Kessler sat across from me, his eyes steady, his hands sorting through Walter's papers with a calm that bordered on defiance. He slid a small brass key across the table, the same one Walter had pressed into my palm in that hospice room. Its surface was etched with a faint inscription, Denton Waltco, Evanston. No website, no public record, just a discreet address 2 towns over. Walter had planned for this, Kessler said, his voice low but firm. Elena was a hope, not the only path. The key was our next move, a doorway to the arsenal Walter had hidden. My fingers closed around it, its weight a quiet promise against the despair that had settled in my chest. The vault building was unremarkable, a beige stucco box tucked between a pharmacy and a dry cleaner, its windows frosted, its parking lot empty. Inside, the air was cool, the reception desk manned by a woman whose nod was as curt as her clipboard. She checked Kessler's ID, then mine, her eyes lingering on my face as if searching for a ghost. We were led to a chrome-lined room, its walls studded with numbered steel drawers. Box 209, Kessler said, his voice a blade. We inserted our keys, the lock clicking with a sound like fate. The drawer slid out, heavy and long, its contents gleaming in the sterile light. No cash, no jewels, but truth. A notarized will, its pages crisp, naming me as Walter's sole heir. Financial records, meticulous and damning, tracing Victor's embezzlement from the family empire, millions siphoned through shell companies, dates and sums inked in Walter's hand. A sealed envelope held a letter, its words a warning. A judge in Cook County, a family ally, had been bought to uphold the death certificate. At the drawer's base, a black USB drive rested in an evidence pouch, its surface unassuming, its power unspoken. Kessler's breath caught, a rare crack in his composure. This was no mere inheritance. It was a warhead, a catalog of the family's sins. The letter's warning sharpened the stakes. The judge's corruption meant the courts were not safe, not yet. But the USB drive, Kessler said, was the key to turning their lies against them. We left the vault in silence, the drawer's hiss echoing in my ears, the weight of its contents heavier than the key itself. Back in the safe house, Kessler spread the documents across the table, his fingers tracing Victor's transactions like a hunter tracking prey. The letter's warning burned in my mind, but the USB drive was a spark, a chance to shift the battle. Walter had foreseen my mistake, my betrayal, and he'd built a path forward. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, I held the weapons to win it. The settlement conference room in Chicago's Federal Building was a study in restraint, its long oak table flanked by padded chairs, the air cool with the hum of recycled silence. I sat across from my family, my hands steady, the USB drive a hidden weight in my coat pocket. Victor leaned back, his suit immaculate, his face a mask of calculated calm. Evelyn sat beside him, her hands folded, her eyes red-rimmed but dry, a performance of maternal grief. Madeline, to their left, scrolled her phone, her posture relaxed, as if this were a minor inconvenience. Their attorney, a man named Carver, exuded the oily confidence of someone who billed by the minute, his tie a flash of crimson against his gray suit. Judge Ellis, retired but sharp, presided from the table's head, her gaze cutting through the room like a blade. Kessler sat beside me, his folder unopened, his silence a coiled spring. Carver spoke first, his voice smooth, rehearsed. A tragic misunderstanding, he called it, painting me as a troubled daughter who'd fled in a mental haze, my parents acting only to protect Walter's legacy. He slid a forged will across the table, its pages claiming Madeline as the primary heir, with a modest sum for me, a gesture of pity. Victor nodded, his eyes fixed on the table. Evelyn dabbed at her cheek, her handkerchief pristine. Madeline's lips twitched, a smirk she didn't bother to hide. Kessler stood, his movements deliberate, his voice low but unyielding. He opened his folder, revealing a single document, a wire transfer, $75,000, from Victor's offshore account to Judge Nolan, the man who'd signed my death certificate. The room stilled, the air itself seeming to pause.
Carver's smile faltered, his objection a stammer. Kessler pressed on, sliding another page forward, a notarized affidavit from a former employee, detailing Victor's threats to Walter, his demands for a new will. Madeline's phone clattered to the table, her face pale. Then came the USB drive. Kessler connected it to a laptop, the screen flickering to life. Walter appeared, his voice steady, the date stamped 2 weeks before his death. He named me his heir, his trust, his hope. The video shifted to grainy footage, Victor and Madeline and Walter's study, their voices sharp, their words venomous. "Sign it," Victor hissed, the forged will trembling in Walter's hand. The room went silent, a hush deeper than law, heavier than guilt. Judge Ellis rose, her face grim. This was no longer a civil matter, she said, her voice a gavel. The hallway filled with federal agents, their suits dark, their steps quiet. Victor's mask cracked, his hands shaking as he was led away, charged with fraud, bribery, coercion. Madeline followed, her defiance gone, her eyes avoiding mine. The corrupt judge's name, buried in Walker's letter, was now a headline waiting to break. I sat still, the weight of victory settling like ash, my name no longer erased, but blazing. The coffee shop in Wicker Park hummed with the clatter of cups and the murmur of strangers, its windows streaked with late autumn rain. I arrived early, choosing a table by the door, the USB drive now safe in Kessler's office, its secrets already reshaping the world beyond these walls. Evelyn was already there, seated in a corner, her coat folded neatly over her chair. Her hair, usually a flawless cascade, hung loose, strands clinging to her cheeks. Her hands, bare of their usual rings, stirred her coffee in endless circles, the spoon scraping softly against the ceramic. She looked diminished, not in size, but in presence, as if the scaffolding of her status had collapsed. I sat across from her, my own coffee untouched, the air between us thick with years of unspoken wounds. Her eyes met mine, red-rimmed but searching, and for a moment I saw the mother I'd once known, the one who'd tucked me in during thunderstorms, her voice a soft anchor. But that memory faded against the truth. She spoke first, her voice low, pleading. Victor and Madeline faced prison, real prison, with concrete walls and no reprieve. She asked me to speak to the prosecutors, to call it a mistake, a family fractured by stress. Victor had acted out of love, she claimed,
his harshness a shield for the empire he'd built. I let her words hang, their weight settling into the silence. Love, she called it. The same love that had declared me dead, that had burned my future to ash. I stirred my coffee. The spoons clink a quiet metronome. She reached for my hand, her fingers cold, trembling, a gesture that once meant safety, but now felt like a trap. She was my mother, she said, as if that word alone could rewrite the past. I pulled my hand away, my movement slow, deliberate. From my bag, I drew a business card, its edges crisp, and slid it across the table. A defense attorney, I said, one of the best for federal cases. Her eyes widened, confusion replacing her plea. This was my help, I told her, the only help I could give. She stared at the card, her fingers hovering, then looked up, her face crumpling. I stood, my chair scraping the floor, and took a final sip of coffee, its bitterness sharp but clean. Outside, Chicago's streets buzzed with life, the rain a soft rhythm against my coat. I walked away, the coffee shop fading behind me, Evelyn's silhouette a ghost in the window. No anger drove my steps, no need for revenge. I'd drawn a line, clear and final, and in its wake I found peace, a quiet vast enough to hold the future. The city's pulse matched my own, and for the first time, I felt truly free. The Chicago skyline glittered beyond my office window, its steel and glass a testament to ambition. But my gaze lingered on the small wooden box on my desk, a relic from Walter's Michigan cabin. Its lid, worn smooth by years, held a faint carving of a star, a reminder of nights spent tracing constellations with him when the world felt vast and kind. I'd sold the Vaughn empire months ago, its sprawling deals and corporate machinery dismantled piece by piece, its profits funneled into a trust I barely touched. The money wasn't mine, not in the way Victor or Madeline had craved it. It was a tool, a means to build something truer. I kept one fragment of the empire, a small tech division buried in its shadow, the seed of my old dream. The platform I'd envisioned at Northwestern, connecting artisans to global markets, had been stolen by Madeline, polished into her startup. Now I reclaimed it. We rebuilt it from scratch, its code rewritten, its mission sharpened. Transparency, sustainability, stories of makers from Milwaukee to Marrakesh. It didn't chase explosive profits, but its impact rippled, a quiet tide of change. Each sale, each story felt like a brick laid in a new foundation, one my family could never touch. The rest of the fortune seeded the Walter Vaughn Foundation, a name that carried his spirit into courtrooms and safe houses. Its mission was personal, carved from my own scars, legal aid and protection for those crushed by familial greed, financial abuse, elder coercion. We hired lawyers who fought like wolves, therapists who listened like priests, investigators who saw through lies. We took on cases, a daughter erased from a will, a grandfather pressured into signing away his home. And each victory, each reclaimed right was a stitch in a torn world. It wasn't vengeance, it was repair, a way to honor Walter's faith in me, to make his legacy more than marble plaques or bank accounts. Victor and Madeline's plea deals came quietly, their crimes too heavy to contest. The evidence, Walter's video, the financial records, the corrupt judge's exposure had left them no escape. They served time, their names splashed across headlines before fading into obscurity. Word reached me that they live now in a rented duplex in Orlando. Victor reduced to consulting for startups no one funded. Madeline posting lifestyle videos to empty platforms. Evelyn, untouched by charges, clung to a diminished life. Her socialite circles closed, her days spent in a condo overlooking a strip mall. I didn't seek them out, didn't need to. Their world had collapsed, and I was no longer part of its ruins. One October afternoon, as I sorted through the last of Walter's documents, my fingers brushed a hidden envelope, its edges yellowed, tucked inside the wooden box's lining. My name was scrawled across it in his shaky hand, the ink faded but deliberate. Inside, a letter unfolded, its words a final gift. He'd known he was dying, he wrote, pancreatic cancer stealing his months, his strength. He'd watched Victor diminish me, Evelyn enable it, Madeline mimic their cruelty, and he'd stayed silent too long, believing peace could be bought with patience. This plan, the vault, the evidence, the fight, was his confession, his atonement, his love. He couldn't undo the past, he wrote, but he could give me the tools to forge a future. Be louder than I was, he urged. Be braver. Be you. The letter broke me, not with pain, but with release. Tears fell, not the kind that wound, but the kind that heal, washing away the last of my doubts. I stood at Walter's grave a week later in a quiet Chicago cemetery, the air sharp with autumn's edge. The stone was simple, his name etched in clean lines, a single daisy resting at its base. I knelt, my fingers tracing the carving, and whispered my thanks. The 50 million had never been the point. It was the spark, the means to reclaim my name, to choose what it meant. My silence, once a shield, had become a sword, my voice now my own. I arose, the city's hum a distant pulse, and walked down the hill, the daisy bright against the gray stone. The future stretched before me, not a burden, but a canvas, mine to shape. I'd built something real, a platform, a foundation, a life, and it was enough, more than enough. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories of resilience and truth.